Okay, um, hello and welcome to the back to school session by the Paediatric Occupational Therapy Department. So today we're going to go through some background about paediatric occupational therapy, about some ways that we can help, and some free resources that are available to everyone in Worcestershire. So today's session will be done by myself. So I'm Chris Bond, Paediatric OT in Worcestershire. And we've got Emma Jessic with us, who's another one of our paediatric OTs. So let me share some information with you. So put it up on the screen. So what is it? Pediatric occupational therapist? Just a little bit to start us off with about what it is that we do. So pediatric OTs are interested in how children go about their day-to-day tasks. So we look at daily activities, what we call occupations. So some of those things are about looking after yourself. So the skills that be involved in that around washing, dressing, organising themselves for school, some skills for schoolwork, how children engage at school with skills such as handwriting, PE, and concentrating in class. In terms of sensory difficulties, which today we're going to just look at briefly, we're interested in how sensory motor skills affect a child's ability to play or take part in activities such as schoolwork. And today we're going to briefly outline some strategies in the school environment. So how can we help? So we've got lots of resources that are freely available online that you can have a look at and get involved with. We're going to briefly look at some of those today. We're going to go through briefly how a child is referred to Paediatric OT, and we're going to look at some tips and strategies. So we do have a website. The website address is there. I believe the trust is in the process of updating the website. Possibly the address may change because we just changed to Hereford and Worcestershire NHS Trust. But if you negotiate yourself to our NHS Trust website, you'll see there'll be an A to Z of services, and we'll be under there under Paediatric Occupational Therapy, and you'll come to our page, and there's a whole host of leaflets and links to videos like there. So it's like kind of one-stop to lots of information. It's really worth checking out. So on the website, we have lots of leaflets, tips, videos, and things around like self-care. So that is skills that be involved in washing and dressing, getting a child ready in the morning. So any difficulties around that, it's worth having a look at that. We have things about leisure skills, school skills, so some tips around fine motor skills, handwriting, things like that. Some information about equipment that children may use, about play skills, and some information about general calming strategies and helping children to self-regulate. There's even more information as well on our YouTube channel. So if you follow the link from our website to the Worcestershire Health and Care NHS Trust YouTube channel and go through the videos, you'll see much more content, particularly about self-regulation strategies and sensory difficulties. There's lots on there. We also have a Facebook group as well. So regularly posting information that we think may be useful for parents and young adults and children. So you find us at CYPF OT Physio. So that's a collection of therapy advice from both paediatric physiotherapy and paediatric OT. We also have an advice line, which is open each Wednesday from 10 a.m. till 3 p.m. The number's on there. And that's aimed for health professionals and those who usually refer to us to ask any questions about referrals for schools, teachers, SENCOs, and also for parents and carers. So if you have a query but you think that occupational therapy may be able to help you, you're free to give us a call on that number. And it's really to give some practical advice related to difficulties in self-help, play and leisure, and to discuss whether a referral might be appropriate. So you can have a chat with an OT, and if we think a referral may be appropriate, then we'd give you some advice on how to refer into us. So if you need to refer, We only accept referrals from child health professionals. So this could be the child's GP, paediatrician, or the school nurse. Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't accept self-referrals from parents, so it'd have to come via a health professional. So referrals for children are only experiencing functional difficulties. So that is something that has an impact on their ability to complete activities of daily living. So that's daily living skills. We only currently see children and young people from 0 to 18 years. So if a child is over 18, then we'd ask you to refer on to the appropriate adult service. If you're unsure, then we can point you in the right direction with that. And Emma's just going to go through some tips for the classroom.
So one of the things that we wanted to go through today was, as well as pointing you to places where that you can pick up additional tips, was to just go through some basic specific advice. And lots of it is probably things that you might have tried or thought of before, but what we wanted to do is put together a whole selection of ideas and just see perhaps whether there's one or two new things in there for you, and hopefully a few more. So we're thinking specifically in this section around the sensory side of things, the sensory regulation. And what we know is that children respond best when there's a whole selection of sensory activities. And you might have heard the term sort of sensory diet in the past. And the activities we're going through now aren't a sensory diet, but the principle of sensory diet is it's a selection of different activities that help with all of the different senses. So what we've tried to do in here is to pick out activities for the different senses. And what we know is if we use a selection of them, then that's how we stand the best chance of using sensory strategies to help children to stay regulated. So one of the really big practical things that we can do is to give children lots of legitimate opportunities to get up and move around. We know that small children in general struggle to sit still, and particularly children with specific sensory needs. And what we know is if we don't give regular opportunities for moving around and for activating their sensory systems, then children work so hard at keeping still, it becomes quite difficult then for them to focus on anything else. And some of the ideas that you can use so that you don't draw attention to a specific child and so that they've got reasonable opportunities to get up that are within your control in the classroom. And things like being able to hand out the textbooks, collect work in, wipe the whiteboard, take notes to the office. That doesn't necessarily have to be a real note. There's no harm in having a piece of paper in an envelope from the school secretary that says that whatever the child's name is has come for a walk. And giving them just general tasks around the classroom in terms of like the hole punching, stapling, etc. And what's nice is that you can have monitors on different days for different activities, so it doesn't draw attention to the fact that the specific child needs those movement breaks. Move and sit cushions can be appropriate to be used for some children. They do need to be used with a little bit of caution. One of the things that we've learned over the years is sometimes people try to overinflate them, and they are designed by nature to be half inflated. So if you're not familiar with them, they're the wedge-shaped cushions that have usually got little bubbles on the top, and the idea is they're half inflated with air so that the child can fidget around and get that movement feedback and that feedback about their body position. They can be quite effective if they're used for short periods of time. And they're used with children that have adequate core strength. So they don't work particularly well with children that are a little bit floppier. So you'll notice a child with weakened core strength. You can tell by the way they move and the way they hold themselves. And we know that if you have a child in your classroom that has a diagnosis of hypermobility, or if a physiotherapist or occupational therapist has told you they've got reduced core strength, you don't want to be using a move and sit cushion because that makes it much harder for them to hold themselves up and to be doing work. They're quite good for sort of that seated activity time, when they don't necessarily need to do a huge amount of very intricate work with their hands, but you do need good listening. And they work basically by just giving that low-level movement feedback. The fidget toys can work quite well for some children. And again, it's weighing up that balance of whether they become more of a distraction or whether they're quite helpful. A lot of adults, you'll notice, do tend to fidget and fiddle as well. Little bits of colouring in little squares and things whilst they're expected to listen. The thing I'd say about fidget toys as well, sometimes it can give the impression that a child's not listening to you if they're focusing on their hands or focusing on drawing or attack. But often that's when children with attention difficulties really tune in most effectively. You see that very commonly with children with ADHD, that they don't look like they're listening, but actually they are, and they need something else to focus on whilst they're doing their listening. Similarly to the strategies earlier on as well, things like putting chairs on and off the table, getting the PE equipment in and out. So any of those day-to-day activities that don't take any more time out of the school routine, I think that's really important. So they can be naturally built into the routine and that they need doing anyway. And I think the important part of using those sorts of activities that don't add anything into the day is that as a school, you're far more likely to actually input them if they're not taking any time out of learning and it's not an extra thing that you have to remember every day. There's some other very specific sort of activities in here around chair push-ups and pushing the hands together. And these are all built on the principle of deep pressure feedback. And that deep pressure feedback is quite calming. We use things like that particularly effectively after children have done something that's whipped them up a little bit and made them a little bit more excited. So certainly after transitions, so things like starting the school day when they've come in a little bit anxious or excited, or after playtime and lunchtime, when they come back into the classroom, what you might find is that children with sensory regulation difficulties are a little bit whipped up, a little bit fidgety, a little bit more inattentive. And those nice sort of deep pressure calming activities can just bring those energy levels back down a little bit. And I'd say that with all of these strategies is really having a look at what combination you want to be in and just trying them out at different times and trying out different combinations of them. We tend to find that the sort of active sensory things like the chair push-ups tend to be a little bit more effective than the passive things. I think later on we've got a little piece about sometimes people use things like weighted lap pads, and they can be effective for some children, but it's quite a passive form of sensory feedback, and we tend to find the things that children are more actively involved in tend to be a little bit more effective for the sensory systems. The other one that we have on here is drinking from a bottle with a sports type cap on. The one pull up and then you have to suck a little bit on. They're very effective because they put a little bit of deep pressure through the mouth, and the mouth is one of the most sensitive parts of our body. So even very simple things like just allowing a water bottle on their desk that they can suck on, that's a very, very calming activity. Chris, have we got another slide of these strategies? No, I thought we had a few more on there. So I'll just mention a little bit more about the weighted lap pad. We haven't specifically mentioned it on here. As occupational therapists, we're reluctant to really endorse the use of weighted equipment because the scientific evidence for the use of equipment is weak. And as a service, we're not able to really suggest that we're using things that don't have that evidence base. What we know anecdotally is some people have used them in classrooms or at home and found them quite effective. If you are going to use the little weighted things that I quite often see in classrooms, use them separately to the move and sit cushion. So don't try and pile on lots of different sort of layers of sensory input. You're much better off using one thing at a time. And if you do go down the route of using one of the little weighted lap pads, it needs to be very easily removed by the child. It shouldn't weigh more than a couple of grams, and it should be one of the commercially bought ones so that you know that it's safe. and they should only be used for sort of 20 to 30 minutes at a time, because they lose their effectiveness after that period of time. Your body becomes used to them, but also they're not especially effective for sort of long-term use. But like I say, as a service, we don't specifically recommend weighted equipment, but I do know that they are things that tend to crop up quite often in the classroom. And the only other thing I was really going to add is sometimes some of the other little bits of equipment and things that we have around can be quite helpful from a sensory perspective. And that's just things like using the slopes to position a child nicely, because we find that if you're in a nice seated position, that helps you to be able to listen more effectively, write more effectively, to use your eyes, your sensory system a little bit more effectively in terms of looking up and down and writing. And all of those little things put together just really help with the child's sort of sensory experience. And the final one that I realised that we don't have on here is just around thinking about the environment as a whole. And if you have a child that's very sensory sensitive, it's just thinking about where they're positioned in the classroom, trying to keep them away from doors, windows, trying to keep them away from very bright displays, because in classrooms we decorate them very nicely with lots of bright, colourful things, but children that struggle to filter out sensory information can really struggle if there's things hanging from the ceiling and lots of that's around them. So it's just sort of minimising that excess sensory experience. So anything you wanted to add to that, Chris? Anything I've missed?
I don't think so. I think you covered everything.
I think that's the main body of things, the main body of advice that we wanted to give. Really what we wanted today was to not take up too much time, just sort of giving the advice that we thought people might need, and really just put the time over to all of you, so that you've got a chance to ask us the questions, and anything that's perhaps a little bit more specific to you, and we'll do our best to answer as much as we can. Chris, do you still want people to put things into the chat function, or are you happy for people to speak up as we have fewer participants?
I think as the numbers are quite small, actually, it's fine if people just openly ask questions. Let me just turn off the
I'm happy with that.
record.